Hello and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Steve Marks, chair of the CMC Board of Directors and president of Hannah News Service here in Columbus. It's great to see you here today. Live streaming is presented by the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation with support from the Columbus Dispatch, PNC, and NBC4i. We'd also like to thank those of you watching today who purchased a virtual seat. We are very grateful for this support and are able to continue live streaming services in large part because of you. Thank you. CMC's political forums are sponsored by Hannah News Service and the Ohio Farm Bureau Federation. Won't you please help me thank them? Yesterday and the weeks leading up to yesterday, America voted. To say it was an unprecedented election is an understatement. There is much to discuss. Let's get right to it. Please welcome our speakers, journalist and assistant professor at Ohio University E.W. Scripps School of Journalism, Thomas Suddes. Publisher of Columbus and Dayton African American News Journal and the former state senator, Ray Miller. Journalist at NBC4 and Metropolitan Club board member, Colleen Marshall. And our host today, political reporter at the Columbus Dispatch, Darrel Rowland. Darrel, the podium is yours.
Thank you. And thanks to the Metropolitan Club, all those who are here socially distanced, safely, having a good meal at the Boathouse at the Confluence, and thanks to all of you joining us online. What do we have to talk about today? Anybody have any ideas? Whatever. Let's jump right in. Colleen, you have the middle seat up there. You're used to telling listeners what's going on in the world, in our country. What's going on in our country, Colleen?
There was an election last night.
All right.
You and I know, both had late nights. Each of us were up to about 3 or 4 this morning. We are still waiting. For those of you who haven't heard updates within the last hour or so, I was listening to the Pennsylvania Governor and Secretary of State as I was getting ready to come here today. Pennsylvania, as much as people are saying, what's going on with Pennsylvania? Why is this taking so long? It is working exactly as the state of Pennsylvania wants it to work. They had some voting reform. They're using a new voting system for the first time this year. They say it all went smoothly. It's very much a county autonomous system where each county board of elections can decide for themselves how they're going to count those votes and when they are going to count those votes. And 7 counties, including a couple of big counties, did not start counting the votes for the people who voted early, who got in line and voted early until this morning. So they planned all along that it will take a few days in Pennsylvania. The governor assured everyone that it is going the way they want it to be, that every vote will be counted, that's a legitimate vote, and that they trust the outcome. As you know, the president does not trust that outcome of any vote that's counted the day after Election Day. So there will be a legal challenge to whatever happens in Pennsylvania. But there's a chance that this will be decided before we need to know the results of Pennsylvania. Right now, the latest numbers show that Joe Biden is ahead in Wisconsin and Michigan. I haven't heard an update on Georgia. I don't know if any of you have or not, but as of last night, when we did leave our newsrooms last night, Georgia was still counting some of the votes, particularly in the large urban areas, which you kind of assume might be going for Joe Biden. So what was interesting to me on the national level yesterday were the trends. The fact that the polls don't always work anymore the way we think they're going to do. I mean, look at Ohio. We were told, oh, Joe Biden has a chance. This is a state. Donald Trump won here again by 8 points. So the polls are not telling us what's happening. And the trends are showing, and I'll wrap this up. I don't want to take everyone's time, but the trends are showing, as expected, urban areas are shifting far more toward the Democratic Party. It's almost like if you look at the state of Ohio, we've got this divide. The urban areas are very blue. Every place else in the state is very red. Working men are going much more on the Republican ticket, and that's uniform across the country. We're seeing working class men, blue collar, male voters more likely to go for Donald Trump. The only thing that was surprising in the trends is that some of the older voters were going for Joe Biden this time around, which might have something to do with COVID and healthcare. So we're following the trends. What we don't have is final results.
Thank you, Colleen. Tom, what about Ohio? Yeah, if you, and I wrote stories on this, if you look at the folks that aggregate the polls the right way and not just average the averages, we were actually the closest state in the country, according to those opinion polls. But when the polls closed last night, again, we should remind everyone we still have absentee votes to count in Ohio as well. We still have provisional votes, about 311,000 of those two altogether. Yeah. But gee, this year's map looks a lot like the map 4 years ago. So what happened in battleground Ohio, Tom?
I wish I could tell you what, thank you everybody for being here, by the way. I wish I could tell you what happened. I did some back of the envelope stuff last night, or this morning rather, and I came to a very tentative and totally unscientific hypothesis about kind of what happened in Ohio. But the overarching picture is the Democrats had a very bad day in Ohio. Their only real victory was electing a justice to the Supreme Court, Justice Jennifer Brunner of the Ohio Court of Appeals from Franklin County. They actually lost a seat or two in the Ohio House and lost a seat in the Ohio Senate. And none of the congressional seats changed hands. That's not really a surprise. But I did again, Darrel knows survey research really well, so I'm going to be embarrassed giving him this primitive version of what I did. I looked at 2016, the 10 Ohio counties in which Mrs. Clinton got the highest number of votes. Obviously, Franklin was one of them, Cleveland, Cuyahoga is another one, and Hamilton, and so forth, Montgomery. Then I looked at what Mr. Biden's vote was in Ohio yesterday in those same counties. Again, it's early preliminary numbers. And it is true that in each case, Mr. Biden did better than Senator Clinton did in 2016 in those big counties. Then I thought to myself, well, that's not a total surprise, but it wasn't enough more to make a difference, because I looked at some counties then in which in 2016, President Trump had the greatest number of percentage of the overall vote in the given counties. And I'm going to tell you three counties I took, which in some respects are outliers to begin with for funny reasons I'll mention, but also I think revealed what the secret was of the Republican strategy about Mr. Trump's victory in the state. I looked at Putnam and Mercer and Holmes. They gave him more of their votes than any other county percentage-wise in the state in 2016. I didn't see what they did this time as far as percentage goes, but I do know they actually exceeded the totals they gave him in 2016 by several thousand votes in each case. I mentioned the exceptions are, of course, Holmes County is overwhelmingly Amish in its background, and Mercer and Putnam are probably the two most Catholic counties in the state. This I can document. I won't waste your time telling you why that's the case. So there are demographic exceptions there, but the fact is it looks to me as if what happened is the Trump campaign managed to squeeze every last possible vote out of anybody who maybe in 2016 in some counties had said, well, I'm not sure about Donald Trump for president. I'm not sure that he's ready for this, or I'm not sure he should do this. I have doubts about this. They resolved the doubts in 2020 in favor of the president, I think, by getting really big mobilization in these other counties. And so I think, yes, the urban metropolitan divide is very real, but I also think the Democrats did not mobilize and get their troops as excited about voting for their candidate as the GOP did for Mr. Trump in a lot of places in the state. That's one thing about it. And I think that's a central issue and a central factor in what happened in Ohio yesterday.
If I could throw in real quickly.
Sure.
I've been covering elections for more than 40 years, and I think the base for Donald Trump has more passion and support for him than just about any other base I've ever seen, for whatever reason. And then the people who are against Donald Trump are kind of head-scratching and saying, who could support this guy? So you've got these two polar opposites, but his base is truly passionate and devoted to him in a way that we have not seen in very many candidates.
That's true.
Well, Senator Miller, as a longtime loyal Democrat, after 2016 was going to be so different in 2018 in the midterms. And it was a little bit in some legislative seats in suburban Ohio, but certainly not on a statewide level. And then 2020, as we say, it looked like the Democrats had a real shot. I don't know if it's Sherrod Brown or who, but somehow Joe Biden was persuaded to change his schedule, come into Burke Lakefront Airport up in Cleveland the day before the election. Kamala Harris, Senator Harris's husband, was probably about a half mile from where we're sitting here. It was exactly 24 hours ago now. So they obviously thought They were seeing something that they had a shot. They didn't. What's wrong with the Democrats in Ohio? What's wrong with the message? What needs to be done to dig out of this hole?
Well, let me start with some good news. Let's start locally, and I'll work my way up to the state and national. At the local level, and I think this comes out of such good organization, quite frankly, within the local Democratic Party, and its recruitment of candidates. We have with us today, as you mentioned, a newly elected judge to the appellate court, Judge Terry Jameson, right here. We're so enormously proud of you. That was a very difficult thing to do, first time out like that, even though she's been serving as a judge, but at that level. So we're extremely proud of you. You know, we get governed by things, and one of the things at the state level and congressional is the apportionment board. And if you were out talking to the average person in the street and started talking about the apportionment board, the governor, auditor, secretary of state, and a member from either house of opposite parties and that kind of thing, say, well, what's that got to do with it? That'd be the first thing that the average person would say. What does that have to do with anything? Well, it has everything to do with who gets elected to the state legislature, as well as to the Congress of the United States. The districts, the apportionment board has been controlled by the Republican Party now for, I think, close to 30 years. And you redraw the districts at the beginning of each, at the completion of each census. And so the census is going to be completed. You'll have another Republican apportionment board drawing the districts once again. And so people get locked out. Democrats get locked out in terms of having a seat that you can. They pack and they crack. And what I'm saying there is when you pack all of the African Americans, and that's the typical strategy, or as many Democrats as you possibly can into as few districts as you possibly can, then that ends up giving you the kind of majority that you have within the Ohio House and the Ohio Senate. It's not that the candidates are superior. It's not that they have greater intellect or anything like that. It's just that those districts are drawn where they're, 60% Republican. Or you'll have a couple within the central city that are 87% Democratic. And so there's no way to negotiate that other than to continue to raise your money, and hopefully you can find a weak candidate who's done something wrong, like Larry Householder, who's been stealing money left and right, but still gets elected last night, didn't he? Still got elected last night because the district is drawn, for a person from his party. Other other good news in Columbus and in Franklin County, all of the Democrats won in Franklin County, and they won because they've been serving extremely well. Kevin Boyce has been doing a great job. John O'Grady's been on the commissioners board there and doing a great job for quite a long time now. We had Judge Stroud also first time out to win a race. But the big deal in Franklin County was the prosecutor. Ron O'Brien's been the prosecutor for 25 years, and lost to Judge Gary Tyack. And that is really substantial. The prosecutor's office in Franklin County really is stronger than any other prosecutor's office in the state of Ohio, just based on the additional responsibilities that they have. And then at the state legislative level, there's some very, very bright, young people that I'm proud of, Erica Crawley and Gerald's, who got elected last evening as well. On the national level, I approach things a little bit differently, but factually. The Confederate states, went to Trump. The Confederacy went to Trump. Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky. I mean, all of the Confederate states went to Trump. Then you have, well, what happened? The Confederate states separated themselves from the Union, and so you look for the Union, and say, well, Biden got many of those states in the Union. And then Ohio, in its Northwest territory, Suddes appreciates this because he's a professor, and so we're talking academic stuff here, but it's real, right? It's real. And so the Northwest territory in Ohio and Illinois and Indiana and so forth, you can start identifying those states that your candidate is going to do well in just by what it looked like in 1870 and what it looked like in 1860 and so forth, right? And unfortunately, the issues are still the same. It's not just the geography of it all. The issues with the Confederacy was around race and not on a moral issue. It was on economic and political issues. And so how do we control that African-American population? And so then, during Reconstruction periods, and it's always about race, right up until this election. And then we have the president, and I'll stop with this, the president of the United States. So, well, they're all good people on both sides, and never coming strong and clear on what is right and what is wrong, what is of good moral character, what is real integrity, and what is bringing our nation together on the issue of race so that we advance even faster than we are, and having great appreciation for people just based on who they are rather than what they look like.
Yeah. Thanks, Ray. Dr. Suddes, the senator mentioned the reapportionment redistricting process. First of all, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe we've now gone the entire decade with the current congressional maps and not a single incumbent has lost his or her seat, number one.
I believe that's correct.
And number two, it's supposed to be a brave new world the next time around. We have voter-approved, separate issues, but voter-approved constitutional amendments for a more bipartisan approach to redistricting, both at the congressional and the legislative level. Okay, that's on paper, but now to coin the cliche, the rubber meets the road. They actually have to do it once the census gets done next year, and go to those panels where there's supposed to be supermajorities and all that. But there's an out where it still can be partisan. It just lasts 4 years. I guess the crystal balls worked so well for yesterday. Let's go ahead and look into next year. Do you think Ohio Republicans, who obviously have maintained the upper hand and strengthened it, will they, do you think in good faith, try to make this a bipartisan process, try to make districts that are more compact, more competitive, or do you think that their baser instincts may prevail and you will have a map that looks perhaps a lot like the one does now, that it's gerrymandered in their favor?
I think it's difficult to credit politicians. This is just because you act in your own interest, like you do if you're a capitalist investing to maximize your profits, to assume they would not try to maximize their advantage, regardless of which party had control. But the bigger problem which the election created or added to, I think parts of the redistricting commission proposals were certainly framed in good faith. But the problem is the two backstops, if the commission can't agree and so forth, basically the legislature itself, in which Republicans gained 4 more seats in the Ohio House to make 65 seats to 34, whatever it's going to be, I think. And the state Senate, controlled for 36 years now, beginning in January, by the Republicans. And if that fails, the Supreme Court, which does have a 4-3, even with Judge Brunner's election, a 4-3 Republican majority. What typically happens, and I at the expense of being cynical about federal courts, which of course we know they're all about politics and all that, as if we believe that, is that someone's already ready, probably with a set of pre-printed writs, to go to the nearest district judge they can find to stop everyone from doing anything in the State House about it. I think that there's a possibility, though, depending. I think Judge Kopp, who's the new speaker, probably will remain speaker, is a pretty straight arrow guy, a Republican committed to Allen County. That's redundant when Allen County is concerned. Might be willing to do what Speaker Reif used to do, which actually was, if we're going to lose any seats in Congress, we'll just give each party will lose one, and that did happen that way. In the legislature, it's hard to say what could happen with the way the districts are. Supposedly they're going to be more cleanly drawn than they were, but I don't hold much optimism for any substantial change. I presume with the election result yesterday, Republicans will continue to dominate both the congressional process and the General Assembly process in drawing the districts. Now, I should also mention one thing Mr. Miller, I know, is aware of, because it's one thing you certainly are correct in being passionate about, and that's the fair enforcement and the full enforcement of the Voting Rights Act, which is, to me, it's been weakened, but I think it's one of the central charters of American freedom for everybody. And that has implications for General Assembly redistricting and congressional redistricting as well. And depending on how it's done, of course, any plan can be vulnerable to a Voting Rights Act challenge if it, in effect, dilutes or draws down the political clout of non-Caucasian voters. That's at least a safety valve, depending on who the judges are and all the rest of it. So I think that's one thing we can think about. But the overall process, I think, will probably tend to be a pro-Republican process. And it would be the other way if Democrats were on the show, I suspect.
Thank you. Colleen, let's jump back to the national level. I'm not sure, because it was in the, the middle of the night or 3 in the morning. The president's declaration to great cheers in the East Room that the county, basically the county should stop now, and I'm going to win all these states, and anything that happens beyond this is fraudulent, and I'm going to go straight to the Supreme Court, where, by the way, I just have picked 3 justices. Can you talk about that issue in 2 regards? One, more benignly perhaps, what does this do to confidence in the system? And does my vote count? Does my vote not count? And number 2, anyone who's driven, a mile or 2 from here through downtown Columbus has seen lots more windows suddenly boarded up, right? And this has happened in major cities everywhere. There was a new wall put around, new fence, unscalable fence put around the White House. There were legitimate, well, I won't call them legitimate. There were fears of violence. Do you think this, you hate to be apocalyptic. You always hope for the best, but plan for the worst. But does that increase the prospect, you think?
I think it does. And one thing that struck me last night, of course, I was watching the election results unfold on NBC, and I really like the way Chuck Todd can break down the numbers county by county. But the thing that struck me was once the president made his what can only be called a victory speech, he came out and declared himself the winner and questioned the legitimacy of any vote that is counted after Election Day. He said it was this was a system created for chaos to, basically to delegitimize his clear victory when there were millions of votes out there still to be counted. And what struck me in the middle of this speech as I'm watching it and thinking, wait, he's saying things that aren't true. He's saying that that's not true about Pennsylvania. That's not true about Michigan. What he's saying right now about Georgia, that's not true. And I'm sitting there listening to this, and all of a sudden, Savannah Guthrie cut in and said, we're breaking away from this because what the president is saying is not true. He is not the winner. And so in the middle of a presidential speech on Election Day, a network anchor had to remind the nation that he's lying to you. But he's lying to you from a seat of power. Because as you pointed out, he does have a pretty strong advantage right now in the Supreme Court. He does have a whole slate of attorneys who are ready to go right to the Supreme Court and argue his case that these other votes aren't legitimate. So I feel for people like Frank LaRose, a Republican Secretary of State, who, one of the first things I asked him, we had him on live last night at 7 o'clock, just right before the polls were closing. And I said, the president is questioning the process. Can we trust the process? And he said, absolutely. And these secretaries of state across the nation are saying, you can trust the process. We are legitimate. We are counting every legitimate vote. We are making sure that every vote counts. And it's as if they're screaming into a well, because they are going to be, there's a big, powerful voice saying, you are all wrong. No matter what party you're in, you're wrong. And I think it's setting up a very dangerous situation for democracy. This is my personal opinion right now. I'm not speaking for NBC4. I think when you have people who are in charge, whose job it is to run and verify votes and to keep our election system secure, when you have them across the country saying, we are doing this right, and the President of the United States saying, you are doing that wrong, it's a real danger to the democratic voting process. Again, that is my personal opinion. I'm not speaking for NBC4.
Obviously, democratic small d voting process.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
You know, it is so serious. It's just not a discussion. We are losing our democracy. And it's in large measure because of the occupant of the White House. Unfortunately, it's in large measure because of the President of the United States. He said what you said ahead of time. He said, if it's close to 270, the necessary number of votes that you have to have from the Electoral College, and he said, if I'm close, I'm going to declare victory, and I'm going to send my lawyers in. I mean, that's not even close to being democratic. That's not even close to being, a decent leader of any kind, let alone the President of the United States. It's a sad situation that we're in. We're going to have to step back and really take a serious look at how do we reclaim our democracy, because we're losing more every day than anything that even looks like a democratic form of government.
Tom, a lot has happened in the past 4 years, and with the president, love him or hate him. Do you think, with what happened last night, was there a line crossed that was different last night?
I think with all due respect to the president, I think he's crossed lots of lines from day one, most of his life. And I'm not being cynical. I want to tell you something important for me to tell you. There are people I've known for many years, and some of whom I love deeply, who I know voted for him in 2016 and 2020, and I totally respect their choice. They had every right to make that decision, as did anybody make the right to choose from any other candidate for office last night or any other time. So I'm not questioning anyone's motives, but I think we have to keep in mind something that, at the expense of sounding like I'm being Mr. PC, and I'm not, I assure you, is the question of how people have mobilized things like race and gender and other side issues. I mean, they're not even issues to me, but they're issues to many people, to mask the fact of economic inequality in our country. Again, I'm not talking about nationalizing everybody or anything like that, but I saw it happen in a funny way. I've seen it happen in a funny way with years of my career. I had the privilege at one point of working in Mississippi, which actually was a professionally great experience. It was. I came to like the people there very much, both black and white. Their differences are still very strong there, but they learned to live with each other in a way, meaning that not in the subordination as much. But I was there in 1980 when the then candidate Reagan went to the Neshoba County Fair. You recognize Neshoba County as the locus, you know this, where the 3 young men were murdered trying to help register black voters in Mississippi in 1964, I believe it was. And he went to that fair, and he said that he believed in states' rights, or local, I forget the exact word, but it was a Q word. And unfortunately, and again, I'm generalizing terribly, that people take advantage when they're in a minority position as a political party to mobilize against things like gender differences, racial differences, and cultural differences to mask the fact that the real issue in our country is economic inequality to begin with, in my opinion. And that's the serious thing. The second thing I'd like is whenever you, in effect, disenfranchise, as I think the attempt was made last night in the speech, millions of people, I have to again emphasize at the expense of sounding like an idealist, countless people of color, but other people as well, have died for the simple privilege of going to be able to go to the polls and register their preferences for candidates. They've died for that. They were murdered for it, and lots of them, thousands maybe, I don't know the numbers, but tremendously. And so taking away someone's suffrage, someone's right to vote, or denying the validity of their vote en masse, whether they're white, black, brown, yellow, whatever their nationality or heritage is in our country, that's very serious undermining of our entire democratic system of government, I think. The other thing I want to say with due respect to the presidential office, and I mean this, if you have not read the book by the president's niece about the president, it's well worth your time to look at it. That's all I can tell you. It really is. And I mean, it just is. And I think that will help give you a better feel for the kind of personality type that he happens to have. We all have one. I have one. Mine, my psychiatrist can tell you. I'm sure. I don't know what it is these days, but whatever it is. But it can also give you clues to how someone thinks, and that's important to know. But I think undermining the right of suffrage, which again countless Americans have died for, is just a terrible thing. I do.
And if I could throw something else in, the other thing that I have found very troubling about all of this, and I can hone this down to a family level. I come from a very big family, Irish Catholic, 11 kids on my dad's side, 10 on my mom's. Yeah. I've got a lot of cousins, and cousins who have children, and their children have children. There are a lot of us. And we communicate a lot online, on Facebook. Oh, somebody set up a nice family group. Oh my gosh. Yesterday, it would actually hurt my heart. I never express political opinions online. I have a conservative husband. I have liberal children. They don't know how I vote. I'm very, very careful. But my cousins, a few of them got into a discussion yesterday that was so hurtful to each other. Somebody had finally reached their breaking point. Somebody posted something anti-Biden, calling him deranged and has dementia. Someone whose mother had dementia really got offended by that. And they started this back and forth conversation that ended up being so hurtful, I had tears in my eyes reading it. These are people who love each other, who cannot. And that's what I think the other danger is. If we can't, in our families, find a way to talk to each other about politics and to respect each other's differences, how are we going to heal as a nation? It's so divisive, and it's so troubling to see these conversations. And you can imagine my Facebook page, the public, I hear from people. If I have a Democrat on my show, people call me, I knew you were red. If I have a Republican, they say, you're a liberal, and people are just so hateful. Whether you're conservative or Republican, can't you respect the other person? Can't you? That's what democracy is. We get together and we talk about things. And John Glenn told me, long after he had retired from the Senate, that the thing that hurt him the most was watching the division, because he thought because Congress members flew home on the weekend, they don't all live together there, it's too easy, transportation makes it too easy. He said back in the day, they all lived together, their kids played sports together, and they saw each other in the grocery store, and they respected each other. And somehow that respect and the integrity has been drained from the system. And I find that to be so troubling. So that's my soapbox. Again, my personal opinions.
I got to imagine this is sparking lots of questions among audience members here and folks watching online. So we're going to let you have your shot at that here in just a moment. Let me shift gears just real quickly, and then you folks can ask what you want. And Senator Miller, you obviously saw a lot of things in the legislature, trades and whatever, to get good bills passed, bad bills passed, whatever. House Bill 6, the nuclear bailout, the $1 billion nuclear bailout for the First Energy, that their spinoffs up on Lake Erie, that one was widely condemned as having a stench quite like none other. And that was even before the federal government stepped in, the Department of Justice stepped in and indicted then Speaker Larry Householder, of course, and the former Republican chairman, Neil Clark, the so-called super lobbyist, active, when Tom was covering the legislature, when you were serving the legislature. It's been around a long time. And a couple other folks who've now agreed to plead guilty. Why is there no political consequence, seemingly, of that yet, anyhow? Why has that not been repealed?
Oh, the act, in terms of being repealed.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a leadership issue. And I was always amazed with the fact that there are members who cannot see the need for legislation. Now, I know that sounds crazy. What do you mean? He's a member of the legislature. He's a legislator. but they don't see the very clear need for a bill to address the issue. It also goes to leadership. I mean, it's a lack of vision. It's a lack of understanding the legislative process and why you're there. And we're getting more and more members like that, seemingly, that they don't really know that they're supposed to be lawmakers. You're not just supposed to be there to help your constituents with constituent casework. You got a staff that can help you out with that. But you're a policymaker. I mean, fundamental things like that, they don't seem to understand. And then the fear that we see that's at every level of government, seemingly, where folks are simply afraid to step up. I cannot believe that Donald Trump says the things that he says, and there are no consequences for him. That there's no one who says, that's wrong, I'm going to stand up, I'm going to say that's wrong, I'm going to take some action. And we see the same thing then at the local level and at the state level. So I'm not surprised, quite frankly. There's fear in there. Even though Larry Householder is no longer the Speaker of the House, he just got elected again, he's going to be there. And he may even prevail in the courts in some way. You would think that he would not, and he would go straight to prison. But that may not be the case, and so there are people who are afraid. There are not enough people in leadership positions who are not afraid to do what is right.
All right. Well, as I said, it's a Metropolitan's Club great policy to have this Q&A. And I got to tell you, at the dispatch, when the Metropolitan Club has speakers, we think, well, we just talked to them, or, it was a politician we just interviewed a week before. But I said, yeah, but they always have such good questions. You got to go for the Q&A because it's such an informed group. And, I'm not buttering you up. It's the honest truth. You'll see, I'll send a reporter out here, or at least watch online, because just for this part of the program. So, Jane Scott, you're curating them from our live stream audience. And if you're here in the audience, yeah, I think you know the spiel. I mean, I could pretty much say it by heart. Yeah, this is not the time for speechifying. Ask your question. It's like Jeopardy. Make it in the form of a question. Okay? Jane, what do you have for us?
Well, thank you, Darrell, and you're right. We always really get a lot of good questions. I think you've addressed some of this, but let's maybe get into a little bit more. Richard Needles, Productive People Strategies, LLC. What early trends did you look for last night when watching the election results? What were the key things that just went, oh, wow?
Well, I think what I was watching for, which is what we all expected, we knew the early votes were going to be those people who stood in line, and that was going to be heavily Democratic. I think we were just watching at the beginning to see what we expected. Would it come true? And it did. Obviously, there was a shift later in the night. The in-person votes were more Republican. But I also was checking throughout the evening to see how reflective were these polls that we kept hearing about. And they really weren't too reflective of the reality. Didn't you think? Were you surprised by that?
I was not, but not because I think that I'm suspicious of polling. I think that some people are less hesitant, or more hesitant than they ever were before, to reveal their opinions to strangers about the presidency because of the volatility of the president's manner, personality, and the controversy surrounding him. That's all. I think people just aren't always frank. That's my opinion. If polling is done correctly, it's right, it's accurate, but you can't account for people not being candid with you.
Ray?
Oh, I simply approached it in terms of who was going to break out from the Confederate States.
Yeah.
And I mean that. Oftentimes, the map goes up, and it's, okay, well, he's got this many electoral votes, and so you get focused on the state, and you get focused on the electoral votes, and I start with the Confederacy. Okay, so here are the Confederate states, and here's those states that are going to be won by Trump. And so what's the outliers there? Which ones are up for grabs, so to speak?
Yeah, it really also emphasized that stark difference between the rural counties and the urban counties in this country, and that was nationwide. Mm-hmm. Big trends that just kept repeating themselves.
I'm Carol Looper, and I have a question that piggybacks on what Tom said. You talk about people not being honest when they answer polling questions. And we know that people aren't always going to say what they're going to do because they may be afraid or because they just don't want you to know, or whatever reason, a person may answer a poll question and then go do something different. So why do we rely so heavily on polling?
We have to have something to talk about. You know, it's a long campaign, Carol. Come on. I don't know why we rely so heavily on polls, but I follow them all the time. Don't you?
Because people want to know the future. Why do we still want horoscopes in newspapers? People want to know the future. I mean, I'm not equating with horoscopes, but that's just human uncertainty. I've always believed that the central quest of human life from the time we're born is the quest for certainty. And I think they think that adds some level of certainty to things that otherwise in a world is just atoms bouncing around like pinballs or something. I think that's part of it, psychologically. I mean, good polling does work, as you all know. Many of you have done all kinds of market research and for your firms or for your, but I was afraid to take the statistics when I was in graduate school. I was terrified. I'm horrible at math. Don't tell my readers that anyway. But but if it's done properly, it's actually been proven to be precise. But it's just because maybe there's such a plethora of them anymore. Everyone's got a poll, and you don't know, it isn't the original Gallup thing, and who knows?
You know, I think we should point out one of these events that I wasn't sitting up here, but I was out there covering, was when you had the pollster Neil Newhouse in, and Public Opinion Strategies. He's a Republican pollster, helped a lot of clients in Ohio way back to Bob Taft and probably before. And, you know, it's helped the administration, the Trump administration. And he said right there, people were asking about the polls after 2016, and his conclusion was they lied. Sounds ugly, but it's kind of what Tom was saying too. And you heard a lot about the shy Trump voter and all that. But the pollsters swore we were going to get it right, and we're going to make sure we have that white the less educated white voters that we undersampled the years before. And there were projections that even if the polls were wrong by the same amount they were in 2016, then Biden would still prevail, which still may be the case, of course. But wow. Public opinion polling has a very interesting future, as long as Donald Trump is one of the names on it.
This question's from, and excuse me, Jack, if I get your name wrong, Jack Towarnicki, American Retirement Association. There have been a lot of claims about Joe and Hunter Biden and Donald Trump. Will the Justice Department pursue or investigate the election loser? If you think yes, why? If you think no, why not?
Why don't you take that, Tom?
Well, I didn't. It's why I didn't hear the whole thing very well. It's my fault. What was the?
Oh, there have been so much speculation about Hunter Biden and Joe Biden and about the Trump family. So do you think whoever wins, will the Justice Department investigate the other?
I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know. I think in some respects people have become a little bit overly. They may have been so swamped with investigations that they may not happen that way. I think that probably any president, though, if Mr. Biden becomes president, I think as a matter of credibility, he's probably going to have to let and not get in the way of an investigation. But I've read some interesting things. Well, we all have very interesting things, but I think it's probably overblown to some extent. But then again, we know that there are ways power operates in this country. We aren't always aware of all the specifics of it, so I can't say that myself. I don't know. But I wouldn't be surprised if he'd have to almost let them investigate it and not get in the way. Certainly, if the president's reelected, if the president has a second term, he may, in fact, want to continue it. But with all due respect to the president, and I mean this again, not in any disrespect to the office, he does not have a long attention span. So we'll see what happens.
I think it's such a mean-spirited thought.
Well, that's true. He has well, as I said, it's an amazing study of psychology, the whole, his upbringing. It really is. And I don't mean anything salacious. It isn't salacious. It just,
it's more than words, though, because he backs up his actions. I mean, if Trump says it, he normally follows up pretty quickly with some action. Look at the number of people in his administration that he's fired.
Oh, yes.
Good Lord. I mean, he's even talking about Dr. Fauci now, in terms of firing him as soon as he's elected the president of the United States, he thinks. That's not going to occur, but he thinks he's going to be elected president of the United States. And he's already, lining up some things there to ruin people's careers.
Well, he's done that in his business career as well, and I think that's the personality that we're dealing with. But I also want to suggest to everybody that part of the secret of the way that he's operated as a business person and as an office holder as this. And just bear with me for a second. Imagine you're going to see some very good friends. You and your husband or spouse or partner are going to see some very good friends of yours, another partnership. And you have a nice evening with them. Unfortunately, they don't know, but their son or daughter is a total brat. They didn't have a babysitter come get the brats. There was someone in the kitchen the whole time you're trying to talk to your friends, this couple, these partners or something, about all kinds of things, your lives, your work, your careers, your relatives. Someone in the kitchen is breaking crockery and smashing pans, and the parents say, oh, that's just, they don't ignore it. You can't get anything done. You can't have a conversation. There's this constant distraction. I'm convinced that strategically or not, the president's technique partly is to create distractions all the time. So if you don't really know what's going on, because you can't even hear what's going on, it's just something in the kitchen is being broken, crashed, or smacked around, like broken plates, and you can't hear your friends, the other couple, saying anything. So that's part of it, I think.
Hello, I'm Tony Guglielmato. Thanks to the panel and the moderator for your participation today and enjoying your comments. I always want to take it away from the people that ran for office and talk about the American people a little bit. Honesty, morality, equality, civility, science, those were all things that I think all of us in this room probably grew up with, and they seem to be out the window now. So what is accentuating that? My question is, are the algorithms that all the social media are using, how much is that influencing and changing the actual character of the American populace?
How the algorithms are changing?
Social media.
I have long said that social media has changed the national conversation. It's one of the best things that ever happened, and it's one of the worst things that ever happened. It's certainly one of the worst things that happened to the credibility of journalists, because everyone thinks they're a journalist now. I can go online, I can write this up, and I'm sending it out to the world, and my message is important, and it can have my opinion in it, and I don't have to fact check it, and I don't have to verify it, and I can tell people that this is what I heard, and this is legitimate, and there are so many right-wing and left-wing organizations out there that fashion themselves as news-releasing organizations that are just sending out lies every day and sending it out on a mass level. And I think that it has not only hurt the cultural conversation, I think it has called into question the credibility. I mean, I take great pride in reporting things that I can verify, that I can fact check, that I can multiple source, that I can get many people to talk about, can I verify this with a multiple sources? That doesn't happen on the internet. And I think that again, this is my personal opinion, it's a great thing the way we can communicate with family all across the country, and it is a terrible thing the way that lies can be sent out at the speed of light.
I think, unless Ray was going to say something about that. Do you have any take on that, Ray? Before I shoot off my mouth.
Yeah, my first thought was, who's the chief abuser of the social media? Once again, it's the President of the United States who's tweeting from the moment that he gets up until he goes to bed and tweeting out, lies. It's a shame to use the office of the presidency in America and just to allow it to become virtually nothing that most people would want to look up and respect. I had the good fortune of working on the White House staff of President Carter. You talk about a person with integrity and honesty. And so I was a deputy special assistant to the president, and I've worked closely with presidents after that. I've never seen a president that just, there's not a word for it. There's not a word for what he's doing to the presidency and America, and the kinds of things that he says and the way in which he said. There's no, you mentioned the word morality and integrity, and there's none of that that we have from this president, unfortunately. And so that spills over to the people. then there are people who feel empowered that they can ride down a freeway and they can, accost someone, or they can go into a state and they're going to grab the governor of the state of Michigan, right? And this is a very definite plan to do that kind of thing. And so you think people are not afraid to take some action? Sure, they're afraid. There are people who didn't even vote yesterday because they were afraid that they may go to the polls and they're going to be accosted, particularly if they're African American, with the kinds of things that's been said. And so, we as a people, we as Americans, we as brothers and sisters, all regardless of skin color, we've got to come together to reclaim the country, really, and to look definitely about those things that we're not going to allow to happen within our country, within our America.
What I've thought time and again, forgetting the politics and the specific policies and decisions of the preceding president, I keep thinking of the dignity with which the predecessor, Mr. Obama, conducted himself as a representative of our country. And I keep wondering what Europeans and people in Asia and Africa and Latin America, seeing the contrast between the incumbent's demeanor and the dignity with which the previous first couple conducted themselves as representatives of our country. I think it's a shocking difference, frankly, and I wish so long for anyone to be more dignified than they've been currently, because I worry about how we look to the rest of the world, frankly. And I think the contrast is shocking when you think about it, but that's me.
Hi, I'm Lee Martin with Rimkus Consulting Group, and I certainly agree with all the statements I'm hearing about the lack of honesty and civility in the political process. I asked here recently when we might expect some honesty in the political process, and I was essentially told I wouldn't live that long, so we won't worry about that. What I'm concerned, I'm seeing both of these parties spending billions of dollars fighting with each other and doing absolutely nothing to solve the problems of the people in this country, like the businesses I see going out in Clintonville and other places besides just my own neighborhood. I don't see anything being done on immigration, racial justice, gun violence, any of those subjects. And I'm just wondering when we might expect that to happen, if ever.
Boy, that is a $64 million question. I sometimes think of those Sandy Hook parents, how long they've been waiting, and they're still fighting. I don't have an answer to that. There's so much. I just hope whatever happens with this race, that somehow reason prevails and we start talking to each other. And until that happens, I don't see progress on the national or the state level.
Well, I'll tell you what we don't need. We don't need another study. That happens too often. It's like, okay, so now these are the issues that we want to deal with, that we want to address. And then someone says, oh, we need a commission. We need to start a new commission. We need a new board. We need a new study group. And then they spend the next 2 years studying, as opposed to coming together with the common sense that we all have and saying, this is what we need to do to take some real action.
Well, we never get to all the questions. I'm going to end with two things. My friend in Canada says, how's the gong show go? Counting votes is a complicated matter for Americans. Laugh out loud. That's from a Canadian friend. My question to end the session is, I've been told that the largest number of votes ever cast for both candidates happened last night. That's kind of a silver lining. What does that portend for the future of our democracy?
I think it was the largest amount. I heard that as well, that whoever wins will win with the highest vote count ever for a president of the United States. That, I think, is good because people are engaged in the process. Yes. And I just hope they continue to care and continue to look at the system as something that they have a stake in, because they do.
Yes, I agree completely. That's one good thing about this whole undertaking lately. Participation by the people.
Right, I totally agree as well. My wife and I were standing in line early yesterday morning to vote, and at the Afrocentric School off of Stelzer there, and it goes all the way around to Fifth Avenue, not to Fifth, but to Stelzer, and I just felt so good. I mean, I cannot tell you how proud I was of everybody who stood in that line to go in and vote. And they were verbal, and they were, hey, we are out here, and we are going to cast our vote. I mean, I just loved it. So what we have to do is we have to maintain that. To have, thousands of people in these long lines. I always have the picture of Nelson Mandela when he was first elected, and those long lines, all throughout the Bush area even. And so people are now, they're into the process, and we've got to keep them there, and we've got to keep them engaged, and I think we've got to educate. And everybody in this room has the capacity to do that, because I know most of you in this room. And so we need to have those conversations, but those forums to really educate people about the process and who's on the ballot and what offices they're running for and what are the responsibilities of those offices and how they might even become candidates for, for public office themselves. So I think we all need to put on our agenda to do more political education.
That's really interesting, Jane, because I had on that's kind of how I was going to end it. And we've talked about a lot of very heavy topics, a lot of gloom and doom perhaps, but somehow here in Ohio, I think it's like 72% of the people made it to the polls and cast a ballot. And we haven't even mentioned, we're in the middle of a pandemic. It's killed, 200-some thousand people. Ohio is peaking now with more cases than we've ever had, but yet still people, it was said about Elizabeth Warren, but I think it should be said about the people of Ohio. Nevertheless, they persisted. And I think that's a positive sign regardless of the outcome.
Great. Well, I hope you found today's forum enjoyable, informational. It was, as Darrel said, heavy, but needed. I think it was a great discussion. We're going to do this again next week, actually. On Wednesday, we've got our continuing discussion of the 2020 election featuring prominent Ohio political experts as they break down the results with an eye towards what's next. It may very well be an eye towards, has it happened yet? So, and then while we've been in this room, AP called Arizona for Biden, and the Wisconsin Secretary of State called Wisconsin for Biden. So this is starting to get a little more clear. So thanks to our sponsors today, Hannah News Service and the Ohio Farm Bureau Federation. Live streaming is presented by the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation with support from the Columbus Dispatch and PNC and NBC4i. And to our online virtual seat patrons, thank you all. A special thanks to our speakers, Thomas Suddes, Ray Miller, Colleen Marshall, and Darrel Rowland. Let's give them a round of applause. We hope to see you again, but till then, be well and stay safe.